Hello students, welcome to this in-depth book review of Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. In this video, we've structured our review into 6 key parts to help you better understand the novel.
Introduction. We'll start by setting the stage for Jane Eyre and its significance. Narrative structure and technique. We'll explore how Bronte's storytelling draws us into Jane's world. Major themes. This section covers critical themes including 3.1 Independence and self-respect, 2 Love versus autonomy, 3.3 Social class and inequality, 3.4 Religion and morality, 3.5 Gender and feminism. Character development. We'll take a close look at key characters. 4.1 Jane Eyre, 4.2 Edward Rochester, 4.3 Bertha Mason, 4.4 St. John Rivers. Symbolism and imagery. How Brontë uses symbols and imagery to enhance the novel's depth. Conclusion. Finally, we'll wrap it all up with the lasting impact of this classic novel.
Introduction.
Charlotte Bronté's Jane Eyre is not just a novel. It is a bold proclamation of the complexities of human emotions, the desire for personal independence, and the quest for moral righteousness. Published in 1847, Jane Eyre swiftly captured the attention of Victorian society for its innovative narrative voice, subversive elements, and the unapologetic independence of its female protagonist. The intricate balance Brontë strikes between a Gothic romance and a moral and social commentary positions Jane Eyre as one of the most influential novels in the English canon.
Narrative structure and technique.
One of the standout features of Jane Eyre is its narrative voice. Written in the first person, the novel offers an intimate glimpse into the psyche of its protagonist, Jane Eyre. The novel begins with Jane as an orphan child, allowing the reader to accompany her through her formative years, her trials at Lowood School, her time at Thornfield Hall, and eventually, her quest for self-actualization. Bronté's use of first-person narrative is pivotal in establishing a close connection between the reader and Jane. Through this subjective perspective, the reader is privy to Jane's inner thoughts, moral struggles, and emotional highs and lows. The novel's structure is also noteworthy for its episodic nature, divided into distinct phases of Jane's life. Each section, her childhood, her time at Lowood, her experiences at Thornfield, her escape, and her reunion with Mr. Rochester, marks a progression not only in her physical journey, but also in her psychological and moral growth. Bronté's prose is imbued with rich, descriptive language that evokes the Gothic atmosphere of Thornfield Hall, the harsh austerity of Lowood, and the idyllic, almost spiritual landscapes Jane encounters later in the novel. However, it is not just the external world that Brontë describes with such skill. The novel is filled with vivid emotional landscapes, capturing Jane's inner turmoil and desires with equal intensity. This balance between external and internal description enhances the immersive quality of the novel.
Major themes. Independence and self-respect.
One of the central themes of Jane Eyre is Jane's quest for autonomy and self-respect. Throughout the novel, Jane insists on maintaining her independence and integrity, often at great personal cost. This theme is particularly resonant given the Victorian context in which women were often expected to submit to patriarchal authority, whether that authority came from a father, husband, or employer. From the outset, Jane resists the attempts of those around her to dominate her. As a child, she refuses to be cowed by her cruel Aunt Reed and her abusive cousin, John. At Lowood, she learns the importance of humility and endurance, but she never relinquishes her sense of self-worth. The most significant test of Jane's commitment to her independence comes in her relationship with Mr. Rochester. Though she loves him deeply, she cannot reconcile her moral and personal principles with the idea of being his mistress after discovering that he is already married. Her decision to leave Thornfield, despite the personal anguish it causes her, is a testament to her unwavering moral compass. She would rather endure poverty and loneliness than compromise her self-respect. Jane's eventual return to Rochester, after he has been humbled and she has secured her own fortune, ensures that their relationship is built on mutual respect and equality, rather than dependency or power imbalance.
Love versus autonomy.
The tension between love and autonomy is another central theme in Jane Eyre. Throughout the novel, Jane struggles to balance her desire for romantic love with her need for personal independence. Her relationship with Rochester is the focal point of this struggle. On one hand, Rochester represents passion, adventure, and the possibility of happiness. On the other hand, he embodies the danger of losing oneself in love. When Jane discovers Rochester's secret, his mad wife, Bertha Mason, hidden in the attic, she realizes that to stay with him would be to sacrifice her integrity. Her decision to leave him, despite her love, is a powerful assertion of her need for autonomy. It is only when she returns to Rochester on her own terms, with her own means of financial independence, that she can truly enter into a relationship with him as an equal. This theme of love versus autonomy is mirrored in other relationships in the novel. St. John Rivers, for example, offers Jane another kind of love, cold, calculated, and devoid of passion. His proposal that she marry him and accompany him to India as a missionary would grant her a sense of purpose, but it would also extinguish her individual desires. Jane's rejection of St. John is another assertion of her need for personal fulfillment and autonomy.
Social class and inequality.
Jane Eyre is also a novel deeply concerned with issues of social class and inequality. Jane is an orphan without wealth or family connections, which places her at a disadvantage in the rigid social hierarchy of Victorian England. Throughout the novel, she is acutely aware of her social position and the limitations it imposes on her. At Thornfield, she occupies an ambiguous space, neither a servant nor a member of the family. Her love for Rochester is complicated by her awareness of the vast social gulf between them. Brontë critiques the class system not only through Jane's experiences, but also through the portrayal of other characters. Blanche Ingram, the aristocratic woman whom Rochester is expected to marry, is portrayed as haughty and shallow. Her wealth and social status do not make her morally superior to Jane. In fact, Brontë suggests the opposite. Through characters like Blanche, Brontë exposes the superficiality of social class distinctions. At the same time, Brontë does not advocate for the abolition of social hierarchies entirely. Jane's eventual inheritance from her uncle resolves many of the social and financial obstacles that stood in the way of her happiness. While the novel critiques the rigidity of the class system, it also suggests that personal merit and moral worth are more important than social rank. Jane's rise in fortune allows her to enter into a relationship with Rochester on more equal terms, but it is her character, not her wealth, that ultimately earns her happiness.
Religion and morality.
Religion plays a significant role in Jane Eyre, but Bronte's portrayal of faith is complex and often critical. Throughout the novel, Jane encounters different models of Christianity, each of which represents a different moral or ethical stance. At Lowood School, Mr. Brocklehurst espouses a hypocritical and punitive form of religion, using his supposed Christian principles to justify cruelty and deprivation. Helen Burns, Jane's friend at Lowood, represents a more passive and self-sacrificing form of faith. Helen's quiet acceptance of suffering contrasts with Jane's more active, questioning approach to morality. St. John Rivers represents another model of Christianity, one that values duty and self-denial above all else. His rigid, cold approach to faith stands in stark contrast to Jane's more passionate, instinctive morality. St. John's proposal that Jane marry him and accompany him to India as a missionary is framed as a religious duty, but Jane cannot reconcile his emotionless version of faith with her own need for love and personal fulfillment. Ultimately, Jane's faith is deeply personal and individual. She values compassion, integrity, and moral independence, and she refuses to submit to any religious doctrine that demands the sacrifice of her own happiness or autonomy. Bronte's portrayal of religion in Jane Eyre is thus a nuanced critique of both institutionalized religion and the ways in which faith can be used to justify oppression.
Religion and morality.
Jane Eyre is often hailed as a proto-feminist novel, and with good reason. At its heart, the novel is about a woman's struggle for autonomy and equality in a patriarchal society. From her childhood, Jane refuses to conform to the expectations placed upon her by others. She is not content to be passive or submissive. Instead, she insists on being treated with dignity and respect. One of the most radical aspects of Jane Eyre is its portrayal of a heroine who demands not only love, but also equality. Jane's relationship with Rochester is marked by a constant negotiation of power. Though she loves him, she refuses to be subservient to him. Her decision to leave Thornfield after discovering Rochester's secret is an assertion of her moral and personal independence. When she returns to him at the end of the novel, it is as an equal partner, not as a subordinate. Brontë also explores the limitations placed on women through the character of Bertha Mason, Rochester's first wife. Bertha is a literal embodiment of the Madwoman in the attic, a figure who represents the repression and silencing of women's voices. Though Bertha is portrayed as violent and unstable, her existence raises important questions about the treatment of women in society, particularly women who do not conform to societal expectations. Through Jane's journey, Brontë critiques the limited roles available to women in Victorian society and advocates for a more equal partnership between men and women, based on mutual respect and independence.
Character development. Jane Eyre.
As the novel's protagonist, Jane Eyre is a deeply complex and compelling character. From the beginning, she is characterized by her strong will, independence, and moral conviction. Jane is not a passive heroine. She actively shapes her own destiny, even when it means making difficult and painful decisions. One of the most striking aspects of Jane's character is her insistence on maintaining her self-respect and integrity, even when faced with powerful emotional or social pressures. This is evident in her refusal to stay with Rochester after discovering that he is married, as well as in her rejection of St. John's proposal. Jane's moral strength is tempered by her capacity for love and compassion, making her a richly rounded character. Over the course of the novel, Jane grows from a lonely, marginalized orphan into a confident, self-assured woman. Her development is not just emotional, but also intellectual and moral. She learns to navigate the complexities of love, social class, and personal autonomy, emerging as a character who is both deeply relatable and inspiring.
Edward Rochester.
Rochester is one of the most iconic romantic heroes in literature, but he is also a deeply flawed character. From the moment he is introduced, he is portrayed as brooding, enigmatic, and morally ambiguous. His past, marked by deception, a failed marriage, and a sense of personal guilt, casts a shadow over his relationship with Jane. Rochester's relationship with Jane is marked by a power imbalance, both in terms of social class and gender. However, over the course of the novel, he is humbled by his experiences, particularly after Jane leaves him and he is blinded in the fire at Thornfield. By the end of the novel, Rochester has undergone significant growth, and his reunion with Jane is based on mutual respect and equality. While Rochester's initial treatment of Jane is problematic, particularly in his attempt to deceive her about his marriage, his character arc is ultimately one of redemption. His love for Jane is genuine, and his willingness to accept her on her own terms suggests that he has learned the value of equality in relationships.
Bertha Mason.
Bertha Mason, Rochester's first wife, is one of the most controversial and enigmatic characters in Jane Eyre. Her presence in the novel raises important questions about the treatment of mental illness, colonialism, and gender. Bertha is often described in dehumanizing terms. She is portrayed as violent, animalistic, and mad. However, her role in the novel is also symbolic, representing the repressed and marginalized aspects of Victorian society. Bertha's imprisonment in the attic can be seen as a metaphor for the ways in which women's voices and desires were silenced during this period.
Her eventual death in the fire at Thornfield symbolizes the destruction of the old order, paving the way for Jane and Rochester to create a new, more equal relationship. Despite her limited presence in the novel, Bertha remains a powerful and haunting figure. St. John Rivers.
St. John Rivers represents a different kind of challenge for Jane. Whereas Rochester tempts her with passion and emotional fulfillment, St. John offers her a life of duty and religious devotion. St. John is cold, rational, and driven by a sense of religious duty that leaves little room for personal happiness. His proposal that Jane marry him and accompany him to India is framed as a moral obligation, but Jane recognizes that to accept would mean sacrificing her own desires and sense of self. St. John is not portrayed as a villain, but his character serves as a foil to Rochester. While Rochester's love for Jane is passionate and flawed, St. John's approach to love is detached and unemotional. Jane's rejection of St. John's proposal is another assertion of her independence and her refusal to conform to societal expectations.
Symbolism and imagery.
Bronte's use of symbolism and imagery in Jane Eyre enhances the novel's thematic depth. One of the most prominent symbols in the novel is fire, which represents both passion and destruction. The fire at Thornfield, which ultimately destroys the estate and leaves Rochester blind, symbolizes the purging of the old, corrupt order and the possibility of redemption. Fire also plays a significant role in Jane's relationship with Rochester, representing the intensity of their emotions and the dangers of unbridled passion. For example, the wild and desolate moors where Jane flees after leaving Thornfield mirror her sense of isolation and despair. Conversely, the garden at Ferndean, where Jane and Rochester are reunited, symbolizes renewal and growth. The motif of the Madwoman in the attic, embodied by Bertha Mason, is another key element of the novel's symbolism. Bertha represents the repressed, destructive forces that lurk beneath the surface of Victorian society. Her imprisonment in the attic symbolizes the ways in which women's voices and desires were silenced, while her eventual destruction paves the way for Jane's liberation and empowerment. Jane Eyre is a novel that defies easy categorization. It is at once a Gothic romance, a Bildungsroman, and a social critique. Through its complex narrative structure, rich symbolism, and deeply developed characters, the novel explores themes of love, autonomy, social class, and morality.
At its heart, Jane Eyre is a story about a woman's struggle to find her place in the world, to assert her independence, and to achieve happiness on her own terms.
Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre remains a timeless classic, not only for its compelling story, but also for its bold exploration of the social and psychological issues that continue to resonate with readers today.